Thank you for tuning in to Koppen with Comic. I'm Brian Koppen. We're here with comic Will Carey. Will Carey, how the hell are you?
I'm doing good, Brian. Thanks for having me. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing so cool. Thank you. I'm doing so good. Thank you so much for coming on. It's cool you're on here, and I follow you here on Twitter. You are comic Will Carey, and on
Yes,
Instagram you are Will Carey 23.
that is correct.
Well, and then here we can see the links to things like your band, which is Bright Ugly, and we'll talk about that in a second. But also, tell me about your podcast, Between Awesome and Disaster. That sounds hilarious.
Yeah, so my podcast is essentially like a one-on-one conversational interview show. It's basically my version of what I would want a WTF with Mark Maron or You Made It Weird with Pete Holmes. I interview I interview like creative types about their lives, the creative process, and on occasion like mental health and like personal improvement comes up. I talk to lots of comedians, lots of musicians, and voice actors.
And so, yeah, why is it called Between Awesome and Disaster? Are you finding out that, people's creative process can range widely between awesome and disaster?
The title comes from my thought that life is a series of moments that kind of pivot towards those two extremes,
Yes,
being
you are a
awesome
genius,
and
Will
being
Carey.
disaster.
You are a fucking genius. That is amazing. Did you come up with that though? I mean, between awesome and disaster, is that you're saying?
Yeah, that's something I came up with. I was just kind of thinking of what would I guess maybe subconsciously I was like, what would a good name for a band be? And I thought that would be approach that same mentality for naming a podcast. And I thought Between Awesome and Disaster sounded cool.
Yeah, and it's got a lot of I don't know, the syllables work. It really is like a musical phrase, between awesome and disaster. It's like a Rocky phrase or something. What started out to be a joke turned out to be a disaster. That's one of my favorite one of my favorite movies, Rocky Four. But also, Bright Ugly is kind of the same approach to naming. Bright and ugly are kind of different ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, my guitarist came up with my band's name, so I'll give all the credit to my guitarist Freddie Heineman for that. But I think that's kind of how we approach our music. Also, is that again we kind of shift between these very like melodic, like shimmery kind of songs, and then this kind of also aggressive like Black Sabbath influenced metal, like '80s hardcore influenced punk rock stuff like that.
Good. Well, yeah, at the beginning of this episode, you're going to hear a guitarist, and that's my guitarist, and so we'll have to share a bill at some point.
Oh yeah, that would be great, man. I would love to do that.
Yeah, and you're like, well, I haven't heard it yet, but once I hear the episode, I'll listen to the band. But between Awesome and Disaster, who have you had on, and what future episodes can we expect when we follow this Instagram account, Between Awesome and Disaster?
Well, this year I've been fortunate enough to interview a lot of my favorite bands and lots of people from the punk rock and alternative rock scene.
Okay.
This year I've interviewed Evan from the band Into It Over It, Chris DeMakes, the lead singer of the ska punk band Less Than Jake, a
Wow.
personal dream a personal dream come true. Well, before I get to that, I also interviewed guitarist and vocalist Tom May from the Philadelphia punk band The Menzingers, who
Okay.
have a really great album coming out that I'm excited to listen to. But a personal dream come true that episode that happened this year, I was able to interview Mitch Allen, who was the lead singer of the early 2000s band SR-71, who are most famous for the song Right Now, but he's gone on to have a amazing career behind the scenes as a songwriter. So that
Okay.
was a really exciting episode because they were like my second favorite band ever, and they're from Maryland also, and I grew up in Maryland, so they've always had a special place in my heart.
Good. Yeah, I love that. I love the fact that we can. I think I was talking to Laurel Bacon Cummings, and she's had comedians on like Sarah Cooper, Mark Norman, and things like that. It's like, isn't it cool that we can just start a podcast as an excuse to talk to people who are like our heroes, right? So I mean, you must be like a pig in shit.
It was it meant a lot to me, and felt like a great sense of personal accomplishment because, like you're saying, when you start doing a podcast, you're talking to like people you know, and the listens you get are people you know. So to like continuously put in the work of editing, recording, promoting episode after episode, and then to get to a place where you can have conversations with people whose work has meant a lot to you, it's really amazing.
Yeah. Well, just know that Will Carey, you're my dude from SR-71. Let me tell you.
I appreciate it, Brian. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. So, like, let me know about, what kind of comedy have you been doing? I see you have a rooftop show here, and you might have shared the bill with Mark Norman. Is that a show that you organized, or is that just a show you got up on?
Oh, that was the Mark Norman show, the one in the parking lot. That was actually just a show I went to watch because I
Oh,
thought that
cool.
lineup was going to be amazing. Since the pandemic has happened, I've done a couple things in parking lots, and I've also done a lot of, in addition to doubling down on the podcast itself, I've done a couple of recordings for Zoom recordings for like the Queen's Theater and various like online things.
The Queen's Theater. Queens, New York City has a theater.
Yeah, it's I believe they're
Of course
based
it does, you idiot. Queens is huge. Like, meaning, like, yeah, I'm playing the ignoramus here, but yeah, tell me about the Queen's Theater. I have no idea what the fuck that is.
well that they're located I believe and I might get this wrong. They're located out towards the Flushing, like if you were to take the
Uh,
7 train all the way to the end, that's where one of their location is. And they've been around producing like plays and local playwrights for a number of years, and that came about because my friend David Lawson, who is a storyteller in New York City, he reached out to me because he's curating a storytelling series for them that's being
okay.
recorded during the lockdown,
Yeah.
and he reached out to me, and I told one of my stories from from not from my current one man show, but from a one that I have planned.
Okay. So cool. And it's a comedy kind of story, right?
Yeah, I always all of whenever I do storytelling, like, and when I say storytelling, I'm referring to like a long form narrative story that is told on stage. I always root it in comedy. There are some
Yeah.
storytellers that take a more like serious or more like heartfelt emotional angle that you might hear on stories like from The Moth and things like that. But I always try to keep everything I do, even if it's storytelling, rooted in comedy. Like I like to have jokes along the way, just because that's what I'm interested in seeing. That's what I'm interested in doing.
Yeah. And is that a difference? Like, I had Joey Rinaldi on, and I was trying to get to the difference between, a one man show by a comic and a comedy set. And I guess, is that because you're conditioning the audience that, yes, this story will be funny, and yes, there'll be jokes along the way, but don't expect a laugh a second like you would at a comedy club?
Uh, yes, I think the way I like to distinguish the difference is I always approach it like nightclub stand-up comedy, like what you would go and see at like the Comedy Cellar or like a showcase set, where the focus is on jokes. So your goal is as many laughs as possible. Whereas when you're doing a storytelling show or a one-man show, I approach it as more of like a theater piece.
Yeah.
Whereas I can have funny parts, but I don't feel the pressure or need to hit laughs every couple of seconds, if that makes sense.
Good. Yeah, that's like the organizing principle behind this podcast. It's like, I think that, I got the idea from Theo Vaughn because he was like, it's not a comedy podcast. And I was like, what? You have a comic host and a comic guest, but it's so cool that you could be like, no, it's not a comedy podcast. So if you want to go into things like personal growth as you do with, between awesome and disaster, you can. Like, it doesn't have to be somebody burning material on your pie.
Oh yeah, exactly. Because if you're just going for material like you would on stage, it doesn't quite hit the same way because the environment is not the same. You know
Yeah.
what I
Oh,
mean?
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I might laugh at it, but it's not gonna. It's not like a whole theater full of people laughing at your every word. Like, some of these comics, like, I forgot who said it earlier today, but they're like, some of these people, some of these great comics in parks and shit, they're apologizing. They're like, oh, this audience didn't like that much, and they're like, no, that was like, some of the other comics are like, that was a lot of laughs. What are you talking about? But because the comic is so far along and is so accustomed to tons of uproarious laughter in a club, when you get 10 chuckles in a park, that doesn't seem like it's hardcore laughter.
Oh yeah, exactly. Or I guess another thing to compare it to would be like if you were doing a nooner like at a community college, like a couple of light chuckles is the same as crushing like Friday night early show. You know what I mean?
Because yeah, people are drunk during the Friday show.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I guess Friday they're kind of they're starting to drink, so they're feeling good, and they might like what's the difference between a Friday early evening show and a Friday night? It's like late Friday night. Are they fucking sloppy drunk where they're gonna laugh at everything, and it's more like crowd control at that point?
Late the I've generally thought that and seen through my experience that late night crowds are usually a little drunker. They're, of course, because it's later, maybe they're a little more tired. So you might not find that the crisply like constructed setup punchline material is gonna work as well as it did at the early show, where maybe the crowd is a little more lucid and is not quite so much in the bag yet. Maybe the late night crowd, this is their like third or fourth stop of the evening, which is the cool thing about New York City in the before times, and I do think we will get back to it eventually.
Before times, I like that.
Yeah, whereas like on late night crowds, you might find yourself like improvising a little bit more, going off script, interacting with the crowd based on the needs of the situation. I wanted to ask you, since you brought this up, that I think Joe DeRosa has an album where it's basically a double album where one album is the set he intended to record, and then the second is him dealing with like a sparsely attended, really drunk crowd. That's a great illustration of the difference.
That's cool. So you put out the double album. That's awesome. Yeah, I would think if they're not as sharp or whatever, you could just do like extended act outs and just kind of become a character and do really well with that high energy stuff. But yeah, if you're expecting them to kind of respect the rhythm of your setup punch, they might not be sharp enough to do that. I like that. And then yeah, I have a quite like it looks here like it looks like for the band Bright Ugly you're a bassist, and I guess I want to know as a musical kind of fan, who are some of the good bassists that we might know? Like, the band has to be popular enough where we know who they are, but like, who are some bassists that you respect? And, what's the role of a bassist in a band? Like, are you trying to add flourish, or are you really trying to hold it down? Like, is your band so punk that you can't even add any flourish?
That's a great question. I want to make sure I answer every part of that. So to answer the first part, very good basis that people might listen to. If people are familiar with the band Muse, their bass player has incredible technique and can play really intricate, complicated bass lines that fit for the song. So I would definitely say he's one. For my personal favorites in the punk world, Matt Friedman from the band Rancid is one of the best bass players in punk rock, and I would also, in that category, and not just because I'm plugging another guest I've had on Between Awesome and Disaster, but Chris number 2 from the punk band Anti-Flag, I think is another incredible bass player, and the reason and why I think those guys are great is that for those bands, their bass playing can kind of become an integral part of the song because they use lots of scales and walking bass lines that kind of like do 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 kind of stuff, while the guitars chug away.
Oh, okay. So they're almost doing all the work.
In those particular bands, their bass playing becomes kind of highlights and standouts for the songs. But if I can be completely honest, my favorite bass playing and the bass playing I like to do in my band, and also my favorite bassist of all time is a big influence on me, is Mark Hoppus from Blink-182. Really? If you listen to Blink-182 songs, you might not think it's super complicated, but the simplicity and the little flourishes he does put into those songs, I think, is part of what makes them great. So my favorite kind of bass playing, and I do this on an occasion in Bright Ugly, is I like to create a very solid foundation because my guitarist can go off and have crazy lead and intricate guitar solos, but me and the drummer are holding down the foundation of the song. And on occasion I do like to throw in like fifths or like little scale runs and stuff into songs, because just playing the root note can get a little repetitive.
Yeah,
but it's when it calls for it.
You're not singing too, are you?
Uh, Me and the guitarist trade off. I sing the song. I generally sing the songs I write, and he generally sings the songs he writes.
And is it difficult to sing and play the bass? Like the Mark Hoppus guy, like he's a singer, right? Like it's surprising that he's the bassist. I forgot.
Yeah, he's the bassist and one of the vocalists. And again, he trades off with the guitarist, who used to be Tom DeLonge, is now Matt Skiba. When I first started learning to play guitar and to play bass, doing both at the same time, I found incredibly challenging. What makes it easier is just is just doing it a lot and practicing, because eventually it becomes muscle memory.
Yeah. And I suppose if you're writing it, you can also make the bass line conducive to your singing. Like you make it a little bit simpler, where you're holding shit down.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then yeah, explain to me, like, I'm a big fan of, like the complex of bands that is a Jesus Lizard and Faith No More and Mr. Bungle and Tomahawk and things like that. And they always talk about the rhythm section of Jesus Lizard and I guess Tomahawk. Can you explain rhythm section to me? And I guess it encompasses more than bass and drums. It probably also sweeps in things like rhythm guitar. What's the role of a rhythm section in a great band in general and a great pop punk band in specific in particular?
Specifically for punk, and I think you can apply this to music in general, is the rhythm section, meaning the bass player and the drums. Like I said earlier, they're forming the foundation of the song, so they are more or less keeping the song together and keeping it from devolving into either a complete mess or free jazz. So so as long as
A
the
complete mess of free jazz, like the fine, that's a pretty fine line, right?
exactly. So as long as the drummer and the bassist know the song and are in sync with each other, then the guitarist and the singer have the freedom which to play on over top of that, because they have the rhythm section holding down the format of the song essentially.
Right. And so, like, how can somebody like Flea or whatever be part of a, storied rhythm section, I suppose, and still do a lot of flourish? Is it because he's playing a couple root notes and then he's doing a flourish? Like, it's a fill. Like the flourish is a fill, where he's holding down the shit, but then he's so fast and good that he can, in the groove, add a flourish in between root notes or whatever.
Well, for Flea and the Red Hot Chili Peppers, another key part, and this is something I learned about, is a lot of times the bassist, you're when I say you're keeping in sync with the drummer. So, example, you might play a root note. You might play your root notes when the drummer is hitting the kick drum. So if Flea is hitting that bump, that low like bump bump before he does a slap,
Yeah.
that's where he's keeping in sync with the row note, and he's staying within the pocket of the groove.
Yeah. And so he's timing his flourish so that he still, provides enough of a root note, enough of a foundation. So the root notes are kind of the foundation.
Yeah, exactly. Because your root notes, when you're playing a song, that'll effectively be the home you come back to. So
Yeah.
if you're even if I'm doing like a walking bass line in a Bright Ugly song, I know I'm gonna, even if I'm like way over further down on the neck, I know I'm coming back to this like C sharp to G sharp progression. So I know the framework that I can work within.
Yeah. And I guess like I've had exactly one informal bass lesson with a former bassist of mine. And, I'm just a singer or vocalist or whatever. And, my vocals are pretty heavily treated. And in our current band, the guitarist, who I've been with for decades, is just one of these guys who practices 10 hours a day. So he's just one of the faster motherfuckers you'll ever hear.
Yeah, yeah.
But his brother was one of the ones who did this 30-minute bass lesson. And I have to, I'm just asking this for my own fucking edification, for my own joy. I'll be able to laugh about this with my guitarist afterwards. Will Carey, I want you to fucking tell me the truth. At any point in time during your extensive bass education, have you been exposed to something known as the cycle of fifths?
I've heard the circle of fifths.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Okay. So the circle of fifths. Okay. So that's something that you kind of what you have in mind, so where you can even, what notes are even possible in a certain song. You have your circle of fifths.
Correct. That's the very rudimentary music theory that I do have, because I've never like taken very formal like music lessons. The circle of fifths. If anyone is listening to this and you're like starting to play guitar or an instrument, if you can at least grasp that concept, that'll be incredibly helpful for you. Yeah, one
Well,
hundred
it's good to
percent.
hear that. It's really good to hear that. It's good, like in your half-ass bass education, at the very least, you should try to come into contact with circle of fifths.
That's incredibly helpful. The other thing that really helped me as well, and this makes learning an instrument a lot more fun. And there are a lot of apps and stuff that so it's easier to do this nowadays. But if you if you have songs that you really like, you can learn to play them, and then once you have learned to play them, you can grasp why that song works the way it does and why you like it so much. And that's another really fun and more, I think, more entertaining way to grasp musical concepts, as opposed to just like flipping through theory textbooks if that's not what you're into.
Yeah, you're like, in the circle of fifths, the first, fourth, and fifth are the most natural sounding of the circle of fifths or something.
Yeah, but if you can like uh approach like I don't know, all the small things. That's a pretty simple song. So the basic chords of that are C up to an F chord, and then down to G, and then you do a little scratchy sound, and then you're back on the F. So if you think, okay, if it starts at C, and then because I'm approaching the circle of fifths, I know I can go to these chords generally, and it'll sound melodious.
It'll be in key or whatever.
Right.
And I guess, yeah, it's so funny that I set it up perfectly, and I was like, cycle of fifths, and you're like, circle of fifths, and I was like, there it is. That's the half-ass bass education that I had 20 years ago. And yeah, so bringing it back to comedy, I want you to draw me a straight fucking line, a short straight line between Will Carey the comic and Will Carey the bassist. What skills do you have that kind of serve you well in each, and how are they different? Like, and I guess in terms of, and I talked with Kevin Escobar about this because he was a musician.
Hmm.
Nerves, stage fright. I would think it's far less when it comes to things like music, because you're hiding behind a bass, you're hiding behind a wall of sound. People can't heckle you during a song because the fucking music's so loud. Give me the straight line between Will Carey comic and Will Carey bassist.
Well, Will Carey the comic has definitely, I think, helped this stage presence and stage charisma of Will Carey the musician, for sure. Because after you've bombed a couple times as a stand up, and lived through it and realized, okay, that was unpleasant, but that
I
wasn't the
lived
worst
I
thing.
lived through it. That's funny.
Then yeah, you can. It's very much easy. You there's a certain kind of fearlessness that comes from to approaching being on stage after a couple of experiences like that. I will also say a direct line between me as a comic and me as a musician, and particularly to loving punk rock and its related genres is uh is economy of what I'm
Ah,
doing. So my favorite comedians are like set up punchline one-liner kind of comics. That's what I started. I was influenced by, like, so Mitch Hedberg, Dimitri Martin,
yeah,
um, Stephen Wright, and then later on even going back to like the like Henny Youngman and comics like that from like the Borscht Belt era.
yeah.
So how like thinking of constructing jokes, what's the fewest number of words I need to get to the funny part and make this joke as funny as I can make it. Which, when you translate that to punk rock, punk rock is three chords to the point, shorter songs generally, compared to my former roommate who's been on your show, Kevin Frolix, who's very into folk music
Yes.
and progressive rock.
Yes.
Um, what is the fewest number of notes what's the three chords I need to make this song great and get people into it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that because you know that your heroes in pop punk have already done it. They've already taken the three chords and made that, you know, like one of your favorite songs or whatever. And I love Kevin Frolic's, and I love your point too, because even Pearl Jam, when they said they were, you know, when they added a keyboardist and Eddie picked up a guitar and things like that, they said that they had more space. Like, and you're like, really more space? And it could be because each person was like, I only have to chip in the essentials. And that's so fucking cool. So economical, fearless, Will Carey, and we follow him, Will Carey Instagram, Will Carey 23 Instagram, and there you can find his Between Awesome and Disaster Instagram link, but also his link tree. Um, but also at Twitter, then you can find, and that's Comic Will Carey. You can find his link tree, but also the Awesome ED Pod, which is Between Awesome
Awesome
and
D pod.
Disaster. Say that, Awesome Pod.
Awesome D pod, not awesome ED pod.
Yeah, Awesome D Pod, because it's that's the Between Awesome and Disaster. But you can also see his link for Bright Ugly. So Will Carey, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Brian. This was really great.